Yes, that's not just Joseph with the good and evil stuff, but the prophet Isaiah has some very poignant things to say to the people of Israel. He says, "You call good evil and evil good," and so sometimes it's just you need to take a check. At least I do. When I'm dead set, I'm on the right. I'm probably not. So God comes around, and we're going to see that here in these stories over the next little bit. So a lot of good and a lot of things coming from evil for the good of people. So I think we did like 2 words before I left last time. I think we got to 2 whole years. And so we're going to do that again. So after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. So again, as we kind of said last week, even though we didn't end up doing anything, Joseph will be 30 years old in this context of this story. He was sold when he was 17, and so we have a 13-year gap. We assume that he was in prison something like 3 or 4 years. So he had like a 10-year run with Potiphar, and then thrown in prison and in prison for 3 or 4 years. But we also get this idea of 2. Now, when we think of the number 2, what do we tend to think of here?
Couples.
What was that?
Couples, married.
Okay. Yep. Man and woman. 2 tends to be, if 1 is the number for God, 2 tends to be the number for people, right? So kind of a humanity here. So after 2 whole years, so kind of in a fullness of time or fullness of human time, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. So God kind of allowed this Joseph to simmer, cool his heels for a while. And so kind of the utmost of human experience. So Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, out of the Nile came 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And then the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. Now, I'm not a farmer. I don't know the difference between an ugly and a beautiful or attractive cow. But if you know, feel free to let me know. So we've got the 2 years. And again, this is the capacity of human experience, the physical and the spiritual. It's a trial for Joseph to experience and to hold on to God's goodness and not to doubt. But moving on here to these 2 dreams, this double dream of 7. Let's apply, if we can remember back 2 weeks, we kind of had our little dream interpretation criteria. We kind of worked through some of that. So let's look at that. Overall direction, numerology, right? Time or substance kind of deal. What do you think? Without looking ahead, don't cheat. I know you know the story, but as best you can, what does the dream sound like? I mean, look at these other ones.
It's funny, when I think of 7, I think of a week,
Okay.
So good week, bad week.
Mm-hmm.
God made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th.
Yep.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Symbol of completion.
Yeah. So again, a completeness of time here. That's typically what 7 is. It's a divine completeness. Absolutely. But it can also be, as we've seen in the way that these dreams the Egyptians have had, Joseph has been interpreting these numbers as time. And so 7 years. So 7 cows, 7 years. And you get that twice. So a total of 14 years. 7 good, 7 bad. That's kind of the overall direction, right? There's 7 at the beginning that are plump and fat and doing what they're supposed to do, which is good for cows. And then you have zombie cows, right? Then you have this awful, evil, they're eating. I would have woken up too in a cold sweat. I mean, can you imagine a cow eating another cow? I mean, just, gross, right? Awful. Something bad is there. So there we get kind of, the basic direction we'll see that Joseph will go as well. Now, the last time we were together, I think it was you, Ken, you asked about how do we know with dreams, right? When do we, take it as I had too much, NyQuil in my system? This is the Lord trying to make something happen. And I think my answer at that point was basically something like, it just kind of affects you more. It was the basic answer, I think. So Luther actually took up that same question. All right. And this is what his answer was. He says, dreams sent by God are impressed on the dreamers in such a way as that they are conscious of keener feelings than is the case with a common dream of man or animal. So what I said.
Man or
What?
animal? Man or animal?
I don't know why Luther decided to talk about dog dreams for a minute, but he did. Okay. Luther's a good guy for most things. So that's kind of where the church stands on that is, how do we know about dreams? You just got a feeling, more or less. If it's impressed on you, seek it out, try and find an answer, talk to God, talk to others. That's kind of the answer. So, all right. So that's kind of where we end up. So that's the first dream that Pharaoh has. Now he wakes up from that nightmare. He has dream. This will be verses 5-8. And he fell asleep, and he dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were going on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And so in the morning, his spirit was troubled. Get that idea from Luther here, right? That impressed upon him so deeply. His spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told him his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. All right. They just needed you guys, right? You guys would have nailed it. So what do you think? Same deal on these dreams as with the cows?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Couple things a little bit different, right? You've got one stalk, and so you have kind of a real centrality of this, that this one stalk is producing both good and ill. So it's not like a foreign power invading, right? But it's one thing. It's the grain of Egypt that's going to rise up, and it's the grain of Egypt that's going to be taken away. You also get a little bit of the east wind, so kind of a nice vision of for Joseph or the interpreter, kind of what is the factor here? Is this locust? Is this, divine retribution? What is it? It's east wind, all right, which is, how famine would come from the desert, right? Because Egypt, has a big desert next to it. I don't know, guys. Yeah, I'm sure you guys know this, right? And so east wind, not a good wind, not a kind wind or a wet wind. So kind of, just a little bit of nuance there as these things are held in parallel, but basically the same thing. Now, here's the question, right? Why can't Pharaoh's magicians do this work of interpretation? Go ahead, Heather.
Because God wants to talk to a holy man, and magicians aren't, I would think, holy. I mean, wouldn't they be using black magic and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, or even just straight up magic. Black magic traditionally has to do with raising of the dead and things, icky stuff. But yeah, I mean, magic, absolutely, they have it, right? They're able to do and conjure things. We'll see that in the story of Moses in the book of Exodus. Moses will do. Take his stick, his staff, and he'll throw it on the ground, and it turns into a snake, right? And the magicians can do it too. That's the freaky part, right? These other guys are like, oh yeah, that's nothing. They throw it down. But then, Moses' stick eats their sticks, which is a little odd. And there's a few other things that Moses does, and the magicians can do a little bit of, but they can't do all of it. So, but you're right, Heather. Dreams are the domain of the Lord here, right? There are times where the Lord allows, others to make interpretations or might open them to these things, but this is closed. This is the Lord setting the opportunity for Joseph. And so he very deliberately kind of prevents anyone from understanding these dreams outside of his guide. So, This is a good principle for us, though, right? So if you want a principle of interpretation for dreams, if someone has a dream of substance, begin with prayer and seek God's wisdom from those who you think have it. Yeah, Ken, go ahead.
So does that kind of give us a little bit of insight into, if you read the Bible, make sure you read it with the right lenses, the right glasses, versus just anybody interpreting the way they want to interpret it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ken. Because you can read the Bible. I had a professor in seminary who used to say, he said it like it was almost a badge of honor, but it was really weird. But he said, most people, if you just give a random person on the street a Bible, they will read it and come out a Baptist. And that's because, if you read this thing at just kind of a surface level, what's there, right? Do this, don't do that. This kind of looks symbolic. So, be good and love Jesus. And I made a choice and here we go. And that's kind of where you end up. But you need the church, which is following the teaching of Christ and the teaching of the apostles to help us navigate those things. Because this stuff is challenging, but in the early church, they followed the example of the rabbis. And in the Old Testament, there were 3 sections of scripture that you weren't allowed to read until you had reached certain maturities. The Song of Songs, you didn't read until you were married as a woman or until you were fully a man as a guy. Okay, so whatever full maturity of a man was, 15, 17, 18, whatever it was. Because Song of Songs, if you don't,
35.
yeah, I know, 52, whatever it is now. But we barely even talk about Song of Songs, let alone teach it. And if you read Song of Songs, and you understand some of the metaphors and what he's talking about, it's pretty erotic. And so you do need a lens. The same thing with the book of Ezekiel. You get, visions of angels as wheels inside of wheels, and it's just crazy stuff. That was set aside until you were far advanced. And then the 6 days of creation, actually, because it is such a complex story and it assumes so many things, the creation of the world was set aside. So the early church, you're absolutely right, Ken, has been doing this. And the rabbis before us has been doing this since the very beginning. They said, you can't just hold on to this. It is like white hot metal. You need something between you and it, because otherwise it's going to burn you up. So, yeah. And the rabbis didn't get it from themselves. They got it from guys like Joseph, right? Who, as you're reading, like, hey, this makes sense. Maybe we need to read this in a certain way and be taught in a certain way. So, absolutely. The problem in Western society is nobody wants to read any other way other than the way they want. So, when we have our way of reading, that tends to be it. So, anyway. So anything else on here, first 8 verses or so? All right, we'll move on here. So verse 9, the chief cupbearer says to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. Ooh. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, and each having a dream with his own interpretation. And a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And he interpreted to us, and so it came about. Right? I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. So stop there. The chief cupbearer confesses, right? First read, first blush, this little, I remember my offenses today. It's a little bit of a double entendre here in the text. First, he remembers his offense against Pharaoh, the thing that landed him in prison and brought him to Joseph. But he also remembers, oh, crud, I was supposed to say something about getting Joseph out. It's been 2 years and I haven't done anything to help that guy. Oops. So a little bit of offense there, just kind of what he's talking about. But he sets up the story, tells Pharaoh what happens. Now, I think the real key to this section is verse 13. And so again, it reads, and as he interpreted to us, so it came about. Right? Notice where this cupbearer sees power and authority. Right? It's in Joseph, it's in the interpreter. Right. So, yeah, I mean, that's the idea, right, of those who would utilize magic or utilize kind of extra physical forces, to their own gain. They have to have some kind of internal control of it. And so they are the factor. They are the way by which things would occur. And so Joseph, in his mind, has this kind of power and ability. And so if Joseph had reversed it in his mind, in the cupbearer's mind, it would have happened the other way. Regardless. Now, Joseph, we know, doesn't think that. Everything belongs to God. Joseph's just the mouthpiece. God's the one moving the pieces. But that's not how the cupbearer sees it. And that's actually really important, because that's going to put Joseph in a wonderful position, because it puts him as the power piece to people who don't yet understand. And we can see kind of God's hand at play. Because if he's just a mouthpiece, well, then you don't need to take him out of prison. You can just tell him the dream and all of this. But if he's the one who has the ability not only to interpret, but to make it come to pass, well, then that's a real power. And that's something you want on your side, you want to put in your back pocket, you want to utilize to the best of your ability. So, all right, so that's what's going on here through 13. So 14, and Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. Oh, what a wonderful verse. I love this verse. Right? Why does he have to shave and change clothes?
He's been in the
Pit for
Yeah. It's probably pretty disgusting.
He looks like the fugitive.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, so certainly from a literal sense, you don't go and visit the president in the street, in the street clothes, right? At least you shouldn't. You should go in with some decorum. All right. Same thing. You don't have an unkempt, face. You take care of these things. Most certainly. That's just kind of Joseph is already, even just for being called up, being given honor and position, just kind of some authority, because he's no longer being treated as a prisoner. He's brought out of the pit. So certainly that is there from kind of a literal sense here. But there's also something here that, when the Lord calls us out of the pit, right, we don't want to retain what we were wearing in the pit. We don't want to retain things that grew on us, the dead stuff, right, that stuck with us, right? So the dead things of the world need to be removed when the Lord calls us out of the pit. When he calls us out of sin into righteousness, right, we cut off this dead stuff and we remove it, and we remove the clothing of sin and of death, the place of the metaphorical pit, right? And it's replaced with a new clothing that the Lord gives us. Here, kind of in a spiritual sense, Pharaoh kind of takes on that aspect, but a new clothing of life, of righteousness, is what Christ says, right? When he says that he will give us a clothing of his own righteousness. So there's kind of two levels here. It's just kind of a nice little thing. So not just a literal, hey, Joseph came out, but when we are called out of the pit into the presence of others by the hand of God, whether it be the authority of the world or whether it be into the true presence of God, we leave those things behind. We leave the pit behind. We put on new clothes, the clothing of righteousness. We cut off that dead hair, right? The things of the world, in order that we might focus on the things of God. So that will be a theme, by the way, the cutting off of dead hair and things. I'm harping on it a little bit here. It seems just kind of odd. It's actually a fairly large premise and part of the book of Leviticus in terms of when you capture foreign peoples, particularly foreign women and things. If they're going to be brought into the people of God, if they're going to become the wives of Israelite soldiers, they have to be, their nails have to be trimmed and their hair is cut off. And there's kind of, again, similar reasoning that the dead things of the world have to be taken away, that God might What did I miss? Yes, there you go. He was
Ready.
purifying his wife. This is Ephesians 5, right? He's presenting her as holy, righteous, without spot or blemish. This is glorious, Jeff. You have served as Christ to your wife. This is wonderful. So,
Good job.
all in
My,
here.
my wife won't let me do that.
Well, I know what your hair is like, and so
I get,
that.
I get it all.
That's right. Every one of them.
Right.
All right, good. So onward here to 15, right? So 15, Joseph, Pharaoh says to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it. I heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Notice the big difference here, right? Between Joseph and cupbearer. Cupbearer is like, no, it's all Joseph, my main man. And Joseph's like, no, it's God. I'm just the messenger, right? So again, this is faithful Christianity, right? That even when the Lord gives tremendous blessing to his people, locating it in a particular individual, God gives you skills, God gives you abilities, right? It's still, it's using those, but it's recognizing that they come from God. So not for ourselves. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, wouldn't it make sense that the cupbearer would say it was Joseph? He probably doesn't believe in God.
Mhm.
At least not the God of Joseph. He probably believes in all
Absolutely.
the Egyptian gods. So
Yes.
there's no reason for him to attribute it to God.
Other than Joseph said that it all interpretation belongs to the Lord. He told him up front that
Right. But this guy's going to be like, yeah, whatever. You're,
Yep.
your phantom God, he doesn't look like my statue. I mean, that's what.
Mhm. We all have our lenses, and that's kind of, this is evangelism rarely works on its face, right? It rarely works in the first conversation because everybody has their lens and it takes time for that lens to be replaced. And so for the cupbearer, he had a lens. And even though Joseph's like, no, I don't do it, God does it, I'll tell you what he says. The cupbearer's like, whatever, you're a magician, you got magic, I know it, right? Okay, I know the game, right? And so it's only after Joseph shows up here again, he's like, no, you got it wrong. God, then me, then you. That's where he kind of, that lens begins to change. So,
Got it.
but you're absolutely right. They are all looking at it a different way. All right. So then we get a little bit of a recap here in 17. So Pharaoh says to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I'm standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came out of the Nile and fed in the reed grasses. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin. He's embellishing in this dream already. Such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. Must have been Hebrew cows, right? These awful cows. And then they were thin and ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But then when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly as at the beginning. And then I awoke. And I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good. 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to my magicians, and there was no one who could explain it to me. And Joseph says to Pharaoh, well, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. I mean, talk about mic drop, right? I mean, just like not even a breath. Pharaoh's embellished this wonderful set of dreams. And Joseph's like, no, God, it's what God's going to do. Done. All right, I'm out of here. Send me back to the pit, right? He doesn't expect anything but just, So again, this is where Luther and others would probably caution us to say that even though there's not a pause in this text, there was probably a pause for Joseph's prayer, maybe a moment to collect himself. But I like to kind of imagine that, the Holy Spirit's at work and just right there, Joseph has got this, right? And it's just cold, just straight up. He hears it and he's got the interpretation because of the Holy Spirit working in him. So Joseph understands what nobody else could. And that's what God does, right? When God does use dreams for, and he'll say this elsewhere in the Old Testament, right? I have set my signs in the heavens for the governing of seasons and times. When God does these things, It's only by his spirit then to make them known to men. Philip Melanchthon. I know that today we don't, I'll get back to Philip in a minute. Today we tend to look at like astrology, the movement of the stars. And, if you can read your horoscope, right? The best horoscopes are the stars have absolutely nothing to do with your daily life. Nothing will change, right? Nothing is affected by the stars above. That's how a lot of people view that. Some people get, real, oh my goodness, my whole life is dictated by the moon, right? I know, Ken, you were telling me about one of those situations, right? There's probably something true in the middle of that. Right? And it's not that the stars are doing it, but that God is trying to make known situations to us by means of these natural things for those who have the wisdom and understanding and the blessing of the Spirit to know and understand. Doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean I want you to go out in the stars tonight and start looking around. And when you see different stars in different places, go, that's what's going on. It was the Russians all along, right? Don't do that. But God does set things in the heavens in order to bring about knowledge to various people. Case in point, probably the greatest example of this is, Trina knows where I'm going with this already. Where am I going?
Wiseman.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. They look at and they see a star and they say something big has happened. They interpret it, and they interpret it through the prophecy of Balaam, actually, that a star will rise in the scepter of Judah. And they interpret that in a realistic sense. And they look for that. They see a star rise and they believe that something has happened. Right? God has set time and season, has set in motion this, and has used the stars to bring knowledge of that to pass. So I don't think you're going to get any stock tips or things like that, from the stars. Go ahead, Gordon.
Well, wouldn't it be the stars too affecting like the high and low tides of the ocean?
Yeah, I mean, the Lord works, how the Lord works with all of these kinds of things to bring about his will, that's beyond my little brain. Okay, I have a very pea-sized brain when it comes to these things. I only know what kind of the Lord has said that he would do these things. How to interpret them, I don't really know. But the church has, in ebb and flow, had times where we have looked more to these things and tried to figure them out, and times where we have just kind of thrown it by the wayside. So this is Philip Melanchthon. Philip Melanchthon he's still to this day known as the teacher of Germany, the preceptor of Germany. So he was Luther's right-hand man during the Reformation. He was not a priest. He was a scholastic. He was an academic. Okay. But Melanchthon, he believed just whole hog with astrology. So he would get, people to check out stars, and he would, figure out what was a good day to do a certain lecture and whatnot. And Luther hounded him just without end about how stupid it was. It's like, don't you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ? Why do you still do? So there are times and places where some people follow these things more and some don't. And like I said, there's extremes and there's some truth somewhere in the middle. Lorelai.
Well, because along the lines of what he was talking about with the ties,
Mhm.
there are going to be some things you would be able to quote unquote predict based on the sky. And once people started to figure out those patterns, even if it wasn't necessarily all the time, so things kind of get tossed aside as like superstition, hey, there is a pattern and this could possibly be a signal for this. Be careful. Oh, this signals the best time to do this for farming or whatever.
Mhm.
Those sort of things, so that like that could have a basis, and then it just kind of evolved as time went on. Oh, we're predicting storms or whatever based on the sky because we've noticed patterns.
Yeah, meteorology
They
certainly.
can predict every instance of their lives based on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm good. If you see a big blinding light that's hurtling towards the earth, I mean, I'm going with end of days. All right, but beyond that, I'm not really sure on that. But hey, like I said, if you want to go out, I mean, where there's less light pollution, and you want to look, to kind of, places of the stars and see what, if the Lord grants some insight into things that are coming, yay and amen, if the Lord works in that way.
Well, just more the idea of like, oh, people in Egypt would have been watching the sky at night and go, oh, hey, I've seen that shape before every year at this time. The Nile's about to flood. We should get ready for planting.
Yeah, no, you're
Like that, so they're gonna, so just like that could be an origin of the
Yeah.
astrology stuff.
yeah, no, it certainly has its part to play in the origin of it and in how the scriptures utilize it. So very good. I think I've beaten this this horse to death. Okay, so let's get back to Joseph here. Joseph 26. All right. Joseph's going to interpret now, and he interprets the same way you guys have been. 7 good cows are 7 years, 7 good years are 7 years, and the dreams are one. So they're one and the same. They tell the same thing, just in a parallel way. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is, as I told Pharaoh, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and then after that will arise 7 years of famine. And all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. And that's an interesting thing. The doubling is a certainty issue. All right, so if you missed it on the first one, go ahead.
You can't argue your way out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Or right, we see dreams repeated in different places at different times, and sometimes the dream or the situation results in the Lord repenting, right, and the Lord changing his mind. And we see with Abraham, right? He's dealing with the Lord and about, Sodom and Gomorrah, and he changes his mind. He repents a little bit there. We see this in a few other places. But with Paul, like with Peter in the book of Acts, Acts 8, he's up on Cornelius's rooftop, and he has this triple vision of a sheet being let down, right? Again, now not just twice, but 3 times, in case Peter is a thick-headed guy. So he needs 3. Right. The Lord has spoken. He will not change his mind. All things are clean. All people are equal in the sight of the Lord. Yea and amen. Right. That's kind of his point. So the Lord there does it in 3s. Here for Pharaoh, he does it in 2. But again, that kind of repeating of the dream seems to indicate, as Joseph says, a certainty or a fixture. So it's not a warning, because sometimes dreams can be given as warnings. Right. If you go down this path, bad things are going to happen. We all have family that, had dreams. Oh my goodness, don't make that deal. Right. I had a bad dream, about it. And we kind of laugh it off, but it may come to pass. It might not. Right. But they have it more than once. You may want to stop and listen a little bit. So anyway, so that's the doubling there. Nice little bit of Hebrew poetry and repetition. All right. So now the setup. I love this. So Joseph is absolutely unassuming here. That or he's sly as a fox. I haven't figured out which one he is. Okay. Be as innocent as doves and as sly as serpents, our Lord says. And I'm pretty sure that's Joseph to a T here. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the product of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. And that food shall be a reserve in the land against the 7 years of famine that are about to occur in the land. And this proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. Right? Joseph here, interesting. He was called to interpret, right? He's now staking his claim. Right? He was an interpreter. Now he's taking on that step as a wise man. He gives advice, right? He has thrived, and so he strikes at the chance. This is good business acumen, if you want to call it that. So as far as I've been able to find, before it's asked of me by Jeff, I don't know anything magic about the 20%. I don't know where the 1/5 comes from. Okay. In terms of, because 5 is typically a number for the senses, the human experience, right? So sight, taste, smell, all that kind of stuff. I don't think they are like for the next 7 years focusing on a sense. I don't get that from the text. But we can maybe see that in focusing when we know that there is a good time coming, or a blessing. We can be blessed in focusing on various senses, both physical and spiritual, as we prepare ourselves for enjoying those blessings, but also prepare ourselves for when there is a famine, right? Because there are times where the Lord blesses us with a great rain cloud of the word of the Lord, and there are many crops. And then, as Luther would say, due to lack of thankfulness, that rain cloud departs and a famine comes, a famine of the word, and we come into the judgment of God. So we have to, at that point, rest on the fruit of the Spirit that we've stored, for ourselves. So, so kind of build up barns as best you can in that case, spiritual barns for the Lord. So not physical barns. Don't do that. That's the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. But spiritual barns, be okay. Store up the fruit of the Spirit.
Well, the 20% is also like a double tithe, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah, no,
twice
that's
as good. It's
Yep. That would be exactly, a double tithe. That's a good way of seeing that. So
they've been blessed with all of this abundance, and
yep, and they should
don't just give the minimum, give.
Yep, yeah, give that gift of jubilee, yeah, that joyful gift, absolutely. That's a good insight, Jeff. Thank you. Hadn't considered that way, but I like that. I like it. Yeah. So that's the proposal, right? So that's what Pharaoh's like. That sounds great to me. And so then Pharaoh begs the question, right? He says to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God?" Oh, this is like a bad comedy at this point. Like Pharaoh just doesn't want to ask straight out, like, "All right, Joseph, you're in, do it." But I think it's a significant phrase, right? Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? So this, the wording here in Hebrew, Spirit of God, is Ruach Elohim. So it's not Ruach Yahweh, which is what I was expecting to see. Kind of Yahweh as a proper name of God, but it's the more traditional name of God, Elohim. So we get Ruach Yahweh in Isaiah and many of the prophets. I thought maybe we would have that here. But Ruach Elohim, this is the phrase of Genesis 1:2. And the Spirit of God, the Ruach Elohim, was hovering over the face of the deep. Right, so Pharaoh may not be a Hebrew, but he's heard some of the stories and he's using that language. Right? He's using the same religious language that Joseph has. And this will be the same designation of the Spirit of God that will get used in Exodus 31 and 35 and in the book of Samuel. So this is a familiar phrase to us and an important phrase for the Spirit of God. It calls back to creation and to that primeval story that we've read of a God who animates all things. So here Pharaoh, I think, doesn't understand quite what he's asking, but God is good. Yes, Jeff.
It's interesting because NIV says the spirit of the gods.
Oh,
and that kind of tells you where the Pharaoh sits on things.
yeah. So Elohim is translatable as gods. The im ending there is a plural ending, but when it references our God, we take that, even that plural, we take just as kind of a formative plural, as a God of gods almost idea. So yeah, it's interesting that they do that. I would certainly imagine that the NIV would go that way, to kind of just cover that base, because I think Pharaoh is speaking here. That may be his intention. We're looking for the spirit of the gods, But I think he's using language that's absolutely religious, that's absolutely like on point and doesn't understand it. You know, we've seen that repeatedly, and we see that repeatedly in the scriptures, that God makes our words mean and matter so much more than we ever intended. All right, good. Anything else on this one, this verse here?
38.
We're on to 39 then. And the Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God, right, Elohim, has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. So you shall be over my house, and over all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only in regards to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I've set you over all the land of Egypt. And the Pharaoh took off his signet ring and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed them with garments of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck and made him ride in his second chariot. And they called out before him, bow the knee. And thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. And moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt.
Dang.
That's right. From zero to hero, man.
Oh, Lord.
I know, I went there, Disney Hercules. I know.
You caught the attention of one of my kids.
I was hoping so.
Listen, man, no, we don't discuss that movie.
They find all the faults with it, as there are many.
And that's just fine. That's just fine.
Well, this
So-
whole thing, I've been thinking about, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat movie,
Mhm.
And you go to Hercules.
So the Pharaoh didn't exactly wait for any kind of answer though from his
No.
servants.
No.
He just boom went into it, and
Yeah, this was, Pharaoh is just kind of, like I said, it was kind of a wink and a nod, like, who are we going to find? This guy. And if any of you say otherwise, I'm going to hang you guys, because you guys didn't have an answer, right? Nobody in the room, like all the oxygen's gone. Joseph just blew the top, blew everybody out of the water with this interpretation. And so Pharaoh is left kind of looking around going, well, they're all full of it. This guy's the only guy who's got anything. Let's go with this. It seems like a good plan. You're in charge, buddy. Which is kind of a two-edged sword, right? Not only does Joseph, he's raised to great power, but everything rides on his shoulders, right? If he screws up, if this doesn't go well, he's gone. And nobody's going to feel bad about it. And so Pharaoh has kind of an out here, right? It's not one of his guys. It's not a real Egyptian. It's a secondhand guy. So if things go well, Pharaoh's a hero, found the diamond in the rough. If not, we can get rid of this loser. All right, good.
We're just having all kinds of Disney fun.
I know. I'm trying to fit them in now. Oh, so he received all sorts of things, signs of power with the signet ring, garments of fine linen, again, a kind of reclothing him in a certain office, giving him, money, prestige, and then, also control over everything. It's good to be king. Nobody gets to say boo to Joseph. He says, do this, do that, and they have to. So only Pharaoh is above him. And Pharaoh says, I'm only above you in regards to the throne, not even according to this plan. So he's willing to kind of submit to Joseph, let him run things. So we see Joseph's dream starting to come true. Remember back to his first dream? The brothers cutting wheat, right? It was wheat stalks. Interesting. Now he's in charge of wheat. That would have been a clue to us had we known to look for it, right? In the very first dream, maybe there's something about wheat coming. All right, so this is a good plan. Joseph does all these things. Let's look at 45 here, because we have, again, a little bit of intrigue. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath Paneah, and gave him in marriage to Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. And so Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Now, as we want to interpret names as best we can. There are some who have looked at this and have said that in Hebrew, and I don't know Hebrew, or excuse me, the Hebrew, have said in Egyptian, and I don't know Egyptian. That's what I meant to say. Wow. I obviously don't know Hebrew either tonight, but Egyptian, that it means something to the effect of God speaks and he lives. So kind of because God spoke, Joseph is not destroyed. But the Hebrew makes a different case. If you take this as Moses translating what Pharaoh called him, then this name means something to the effect of the Z word there, that Zaphanath, it means you have hidden. And the Paneah is a corruption, kind of a mispronunciation of Pera'ah, which means he opens wide. And so his name would be something to the effect of the one who opens what was hidden, which is a far better descriptor of Joseph in this position, right? His name is the one who opens dreams, right? He's the interpreter. So that's where I tend to go with that. So Joseph is given the name, the interpreter. All of Egypt kind of knows him under this. But his marriage now is very interesting. The priest, he marries the daughter of the Potipharah, the priest of On. Now, at first glance, it seems like the priest is worshiping On. On is actually a city in Egypt. The city in Egypt is one of the oldest cities of the Egyptian culture. And this holy city worships the god Atum, Atum. And the god Atum is in the Egyptian hierarchy. He's the creator god. He's the god who formed humanity. He is both male and female. He is symbolized by the sun. He is the one that called all these other kind of Egyptian gods into being as well. So there's some major connections to Yahweh of the Old Testament, to God the Father, as we might say, and who Joseph is connected to. We can also see that Pharaoh is already kind of moving Joseph into the spiritual power structure at the highest levels to kind of legitimize his action. Again, Joseph could get cut off without any legs underneath him if this goes sour, but if he goes well, he wants to kind of initiate him into the power structure. So that's kind of what's going on here. Joseph will have 2 kids with this Egyptian woman, Manasseh and Ephraim. So, and they will be large players. Joseph was 30 years old, verse 46, when he entered the service of Pharaoh the king, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. So we already talked about that, kind of, 13 years or so as a slave. Anything else in this section so far? Well, good. 10 minutes, 10 verses.
I wonder what the Egyptians thought of an outsider ruling them.
Oh, that is a great question, Jeff. And I think if I am to understand culture and people to remain fairly constant in the good times, they couldn't have cared less because things were going up and up. And in the bad time, maybe they whined a little bit that this foreigner was stealing their grain. But by the time the famine ended and they survived, he was one of them. And I think that's why it was so important that Pharaoh, because kind of from a political sphere interpretation, so important that he initiated Joseph into the power structure, right? Okay, he was a Hebrew slave, but now he's married into like chief priest of like God of gods kind of deal. So he's at least, in the right Washington suburb, if not, on the right certain hill.
So if the person he married was priest for autumn, then we should be able to use that to figure out the specific time period for this then, because if I remember correctly, autumn was a variation or interpretation put in place by a specific pharaoh that only lasted a little while. Because usually it's Ra or Aten Ra
Mhm.
that's put in that light. So
Yeah, that creator motif, yeah. Well, we know that Abraham leaves or comes to Cana in 2166 BC, and that Moses will lead the children of Israel out of Egypt in 1446 BC. So we have kind of that window. There's been biblical scholars who've kind of set these things based on the archaeology that they've been able to uncover and dig out. David will reign from 1010 to 970 BC. So we have a rough time period. We know that Israel's in Egypt for roughly 400 years, right, during this period after Joseph. And the archaeology does. And I encourage you, pick up like a biblical archaeology review on Bar magazine, or jump online, and these dates will line up.
Doesn't one of you have that?
the archaeology,
Yeah.
like his archaeology.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
For confirmation, my mother-in-law got one of them, an archaeological Bible.
There you go. Yeah, check it out.
Mother-in-law got what, a chronological.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely look up this passage in there, see if it's got anything cool on it. But from what I've been able to uncover, the dates do line up in terms of worship. And you're right, there is some.
Because I remember I can't remember what time period of Egypt it was, but I remember watching a whole thing about several things about different pharaohs, and specifically the guy talked in one of the videos. The guy talked about the one who put in place of the worship of Autumn, and it's like lasted like barely past his reign, if that. So
Yeah, Autumn is one who kind of, he exists first in the hierarchy, and in the kind of, you go real far back, you're going to get stories of him, but he does get replaced, with newer stories, because the pharaoh is supposed to be this incarnation, this representative on earth of this god. And so you've got deals with Osiris and some of that issue, and then you have Ra coming into play.
yeah, well, and specifically, and I mean, I don't have all the most in-depth resources, but for the most part, what I remember reading about it, in like the book she got me in New York once, is you have Aten, the sun god, and Ra or Aten Ra are basically the same, but basically it's determined which pharaoh was in power, determined who was worshipped as your highest god. And then you have the stories of like the pharaoh is the incarnation of usually Horus, was the belief, and you have all of that stuff going on.
It's good to be king. You get to do whatever you want. And that's actually a motif that's not isolated to Egypt. Throughout the ancient Near East, this is why in the scriptures, when Israel says we want a king, Samuel and the Lord's like, no, you don't. God is your king. Because otherwise they start manifesting this idea that the king has to have these divine qualities. So that's what they see. They see it in Egypt, in the kingdom of Babylon. Marduk is the god king, and the emperor there, whether it be Nebuchadnezzar or whomever, they have to go through certain rites and rituals, again, just identical to kind of this process where they are the embodying the god and all that stuff. So, all right. Well, we aren't going to get through the rest of this chapter. I had 10 minutes to do 10 verses. Ain't going to happen. So, no. I mean, we'll fly a little bit here, but let's just get through, a couple more. We got about 4 minutes before the hour. Then we'll answer questions and let you guys go. So 47, during the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. And he, that's Joseph, gathered up all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and put the food in the cities. And he put in every city the food from the fields around it. It's a state builder. This is how you build cities. How you incorporate from farm and rural to actually having a city state. This is really interesting. And Joseph stored up the grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. This is how plentiful everything was. And before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. So in 7 years, he has 2 kids from Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. And Joseph called the name of the first one Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. So Manasseh means something to the effect of forgetting hardship. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful. Again, Ephraim means something to the effect of fruitfulness. Has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So I like this. You know, it's kind of, we got, you know, double trouble here in the kids. You got a trope and you got a trouble, right? You know, you have trouble in the firstborn, and you have this, you know, trope that God has made me fruitful even in this terrible place, which is a theme we get repeatedly, that God is with his people and they produce, you know, good fruit wherever he plants them. So, and this just continues out through all scripture. So, yeah. So nothing really, you know, these are wonderful. I love the end of Genesis, because we start and it's wonderful figurativeness, and everything kind of just oozes this reading. And then we get a little bit further on into these sorts of stories with Joseph, and becomes a little more literal focused. There's spiritual stuff there too, but it's a little more literally focused here. So it's kind of wonderful transition in the book. Should we do it? All right, we're doing it. We're gonna finish the chapter. Who would have thought? 57 verses, right? And 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and 7 years of famine began to come, and as Joseph had said, and there was famine in all the lands. Ooh, not just Egypt, but all the lands. But in the land of Egypt, there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. What he says to you, do." And so the famine had spread over all the land. Joseph opened the storehouses and sold to all the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. And moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to buy, to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. There we go. Do it. Done. Awesome.
How did he store all those cows all that time? Because bread is one, but cows are another.
Yeah, well,
No cow for you.
Oh, no.
that's right. I don't think he stored cows. I think he just stored the grain and, you know, tried as best he could to keep their cows alive by giving them more grain.
Oh, okay. All right. Grain fed. That's all right.
Yep. So they would have been feeding their livestock out of the stuff they were buying, not only for themselves, but for their animals as well. But sociologically, this is incredible, right? This is the consolidation of wealth. So this is how Pharaoh gets rich, because he tells everybody, you owe me grain. And so they pay him a tribute of grain. And then when they are dying, he says, now pay me for the bread. And he sells them the bread. He gets paid twice. This is fantastic from a governmental perspective, right? And then
I did find that interesting that he charged them for the grain.
he's no dummy.
Yeah.
Someone's got to pay for this administration. And then he does the same thing to the world. This is when Egypt becomes a world power. It's through Joseph. It's this event. His management of grain brings wealth, renown to this place because of what he's done. So Joseph really sets up Egypt for the next almost 2,000 years of power and prestige by this kind of singular event, because they had it all, they survived well, and they plundered the nations, at least for a time. But this also, I will say, this verse here about kind of everybody having to come and pay will give some backstory. If you ever read through the book of Exodus and you see that when Israel leaves, when they are finally, after the 10 plagues, they're told, get out, they are given, the Egyptians basically throw gold at them, throw earrings at them, throw all sorts of wealth at them to make them leave. You know, you're just like, they're so filthy rich, they're throwing jewelry at the Jews, trying to get them to leave. And so the scriptures say they plunder Egypt, right? That's how rich Egypt was. That even as the slaves are leaving, they're just pushing this stuff on them to get them to go away. And it comes from this event. So good.
That's interesting. You think if Egypt knew this was going to happen, there's travelers. You think the word would have gotten out, oh, there's going to be 7 good years, 7 yet. Maybe they just thought it was going to be Egypt. But, you know, it's funny because the rest of the world, you'd think would have gotten a little inkling of what's going on. But
yeah, but those
they're just like, yeah, whatever.
they think they got magic. I mean, they can make sticks turn into snakes, but you know, I mean, really, 7
Yeah.
years? Come on. But actually, Trina, in all honesty, I don't think you're wrong. I think the word did go out. We'll see that actually in the next chapter, because Jacob is going to start smacking the heads of his children for doing nothing. Your comment will help make sense of that why Jacob would understand something that his boys seemingly don't. So, but we'll get to that next week. So same bad time, same bad channel. Next week we'll be here for this. Next week we'll also start kind of our What Is series over at church. So yeah, thanks everybody. That's what we've got for you tonight, unless there's any more questions. All righty then. Thank you
All
so
right.
much for being here. God bless you.